Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Centre for Legal Innovation's very first, our inaugural Legal Techy Tuesday series. We're absolutely delighted to have Evan Wong, the co-founder and CEO of Checkbox, doing their very first virtual demo for us. Hi, Evan. Good morning.
Hi,
Great to see you.
thanks for having me.
Oh, an absolute pleasure. And before we hand over to Evan, I'm just going to do a couple of quick housekeeping matters. We're going to ask you actually that you switch off your microphones and also switch off your webcams so that basically we can get as clear a picture and broadcast as possible. So if you wouldn't mind to go ahead and do that. The other thing that I just want to mention to you is that you will see that there is a question and answer. It's actually called Q&A box on your screen as well. Please feel free to use that at any time to type in your questions. Evan will be able to see them and respond to them as he goes along or also towards the end. So again, absolutely delighted to be launching this series. We hope that it makes the sort of amazing legal tech that people like Evan and Checkbox are developing more accessible to people, not only in real time, but also when it's convenient for them to catch up. Legal tech, a hugely important part of our industry now. Apparently, about a 1.6 billion US dollar industry right now. And again, happy to introduce Checkbox and now turn all of this over to you, Evan. I'll be back at the end to say goodbye. But otherwise, Evan, again, thank you very much and over to you.
Thank you, Terry. Very kind of you. So, yeah, this is super exciting for me and for Checkbox. This is obviously the first Centre for Legal Innovation Techy Tuesday. I'm going to kick it off. So, thank you for that honor. So today, I want to really give you a deep dive onto how Checkbox looks like, the actual technology, but also some of the back end of it, and also share with you some of the use cases of how people in the industry are currently already using our technology as well. As Terry mentioned earlier, please, if you have any questions along the way, shoot them in the Q&A box. I will actually answer the questions at the end of the session, so I don't jump back and forth if that's okay. Just type them in and I'll get to them at the end of the presentation. But today I'll really be talking about legal automation without coding. And this is a really exciting kind of topic for us, not just because we are a technology that's built around this concept, but because we see the legal market really moving towards this direction. You know, we've had a good few years now of practice management systems, document management systems, and kind of a lot of the and e-billing, e-discovery, you know, a lot of the kind of technology that sits at the foundation, whether you're a law firm or whether you're an in-house corporate team. And we're starting to see what is really phase two of legal services delivery, moving into things like workflow and automation. So without further ado, let me kick off my presentation. So I guess the question is really why? Why is the industry kind of moving in this direction? Well, if we start with the end customer here, which is, you know, the corporate legal, if we're talking about, you know, the corporate sense, there are three key drivers for this. The first one is that there is huge pressure around cost reduction. And this is, you know, in all businesses and I guess really across all business units. But legal being typically seen as a cost center is really feeling this pressure today. And we see a lot of strategies across big enterprise. You know, their strategies are all centered around how do we make things cheaper for us internally. There's also this pressure for being data driven, having more visibility and also externally from regulators, a higher degree of compliance required that is often managed by the legal teams. So how do you actually know how often do you execute an NDA or how often do you have a data breach? How do you know when you have a data breach and if you're actually compliant as an organization? These pressures as well for the corporate in-house teams. And finally, something that's a bit more exciting for the corporate teams is a self-driven factor, which is let's not be a cost center anymore. Let's not be the end of a process to sign off on risk. Let's try and move up that strategic food chain and actually be part of the active decision-making process. So all three of these are really driving corporate legal to looking at automation and workflow automation as well. Now, that of course, flows automatically into the law firms, right? Their panel law firms or even external counsel. You know, these factors here are directly putting pressure on law firms to also have this expectation to deliver more for less, right? So they have to now deliver more for less, but also there's quite a lot of expectation for value add. And you'll see this in actually the contracts with engaging law firms, that there must be a certain minimum level of value add that must be provided as part of the engagement between the corporates and the law firms. So there's that kind of pressure there. So how do you actually then go and deliver more? The other thing is actually efficiency, as well as the business model is being challenged for law firms. So, how do we increase the margin on fixed fee work? Or perhaps if it is value add work, how do we deliver the maximum amount of value without really consuming our resources as well as a law firm? And the final thing is, again, a bit more exciting. It is this kind of proactive desire of law firms to go and productize or commoditize some of the services that they're already delivering, but they know are under attack by either legal tech vendors or alternative business models seen in new law or alternative legal service providers. How do you disrupt yourself through automation and productization before you're disrupted by someone else? But also this concept of being perceived and actually doing innovation as a law firm. Because what we see today more and more, very interestingly, particularly in Australia, is in order for you to even win panel work, now traditionally you would have to submit your CVs and all the previous engagements and projects you've done as a law firm, and it's based upon how experienced your lawyers are. Now we're starting to see in tenders the request from the actual end client: how innovative are you as a law firm? What are you doing in technology so that you can actually deliver more value to me, not just through people, but through technology? So all these pressures are basically building up to say, look, we need to look at automation. But it's also really important to understand that not everything can and should be automated. This is a very important point. You should not, and not everything can be automated. So what should we do? Well, if you think about what lawyers do and what experts do generally, is their job comprises of three key steps, right? The first step is really to gather and organize the facts. And after you do that, you would then need to analyze those facts to come up with some sort of outcome. And that would lead to the third part, which is the actions. After you've analyzed those facts, you would either send an email, you provide a piece of advice, you create a document, an agreement, whatever it may be. And the key thing here is everything that I've highlighted in dark green is highly automatable. The gathering of facts, the organizing of facts. And if the analysis is in fact rules-based, then that can be automated as well. So why are experts currently involved in that? Well, it's because experts are often involved because of the complexity of the rules or the volume of the rules. But nonetheless, they are rules-driven. Whereas on the flip side, if you look at the gray area, the things that are non-automatable, that is when you need an expert to make a subjective judgment. This is something that is, impossible at the moment for computers to replicate, and maybe AI will get there eventually, maybe. But for now, it is very, very unique to experts. And that is why it's very important to appreciate that those are the areas that the experts, as lawyers today, as in-house counsel, as law firms, this is where we can genuinely add unique value. This is where we should be playing it. This is what we should be paid for. So everything else in the dark green, we should be looking at to automate. So the challenge is that as lawyers, as an industry, as a legal profession, we aren't trained in IT, in technology. We don't know how to program for most of us. And so how do you actually go and undergo this kind of journey of automation and digital transformation that is coming to us from in all directions? Well, that's actually why we built Checkbox, right? So we built Checkbox to tackle this exact challenge. We've built it to empower non-IT users, potentially lawyers, potentially business analysts as well, doesn't have to be lawyers, to build their own automation and workflow software, purely using drag and drop. And I'll show you this in the flesh today. And what we do is we combine all of these different elements. And again, I'll show you all this in a second, but we combine things like forms to do the information intake. We have decision trees and calculation engines to actually allow you to do triage, any sort of numerical calculations or weighted score for risk weightings, as an example. There's document automation as well. So generating your agreements, your, I don't know, your reports, your letters, and that's all tied with e-signature. And then also we combine all of these with workflows. So you can actually do all of the approvals online or digital, and automatically sent to the right levels of authority as well. And you can visualize all this on dashboards with analytics. And of course, all of this is kept in a record as well, which is important for, depending on the domain you're working in, you need to keep things for 7 years, or perhaps it is simply a visibility a requirement for, say, more senior partners in a firm, or maybe the core legal team, to see the work that has been done in the past by other people. So the key thing is we've combined all of these technologies onto the one platform, which you often will see done separately in other pieces of software. So we've brought it all together on one single seamless no-code platform. Great. Well, that's enough background, I think. Let's go and see the actual Checkbox technology. And after this, I'll dive into some other use cases, because there's not enough time for me to go through in the flesh all the use cases. So I'll talk about them after I show you one example in Checkbox itself. All right, so let's do it. I'm going to log in. This is essentially one way you can access Checkbox. There are many ways you can access it. You can even just embed Checkbox on a link, as an example, on a button, in your intranet portal, or perhaps single sign-on as well if you've got Active Directory set up with your organization. But here I'm just going to go in and we're going to use privacy as an example today. And then we'll talk about, like I said, the other use cases later on. The reason why I'm picking privacy is because it is often dealt with by both law firms as well as corporate counsel, mindful that the audience on the other side may be from both camps, either camp. So it's relatable in both camps. And also it's quite topical, right? So, across the globe, we have now quite a high level of scrutiny around privacy and data handling, and particularly breaches. In Australia, we have what is known as the notifiable data breach, which sits under the Privacy Act amendment from 2018. For example, Singapore, they have an equivalent one called the PDPA. And of course, in the UK, the one that's a bit more known globally is managed by the GDPR framework. So we'll use this as a domain today. Checkbox isn't obviously a privacy tool, but we'll use it as the domain to kind of look through as a lens. So here we have the studio. It is the drag and drop no-code interface for building applications. And I've zoomed out here. I know no one at home can see what this says. I'm just showing you the size of this application. All right, so it looks like this. And what this tool does is it's going to first work out the eligibility for a particular suspected breach in falling under this particular scheme. And this is why we often are also classified as not just legal tech, but sometimes as reg tech as well, regulation technology. Because you can actually codify what is basically a piece of legislation or regulation into Checkbox to work out if you fall within that scheme. And then the second thing this tool does is it actually works out by the rules governing that legislation, combined with perhaps your own internal policy and interpretation, if you actually need to notify the affected parties or the commissioner, or generate a board paper for the board. And then what it does as the third thing is, if there is a notification required, it then also generates the documents that you may need to serve to the affected parties, as well as the approval processes being kicked off as well. All right, so let's see how this whole thing works. Let's say, hypothetically, that we needed to change this tool because the external regulation said, well, this tool is now only applicable to employees. It does not apply to doesn't apply to independent contractors. So what I'll do is I have a whole bunch of different blocks here, different components in my toolkit, but I might go and use a yes/no block for this particular control. And I'll walk through some of the other things later on in this webinar. But let's go and drag in a yes/no block just like that, and I'll go and give it some sort of context. I might call this the employee test. I'll ask the basic question. I'll say, are you an employee of let's call it CLI. That's the Center for Legal Innovation. So are you an employee of CLI? And I'll go and add a tip as well. So tip is basically on-screen guidance notes that can walk you through the content to ensure that you have all the information that you need to make the decision on the one page. So here I'm going to say definition of employee, and maybe we'll go with something pretty basic today. We'll say a worker who is not a contractor. Brilliant. So of course you can build in Checkbox as well, the whole employee contractor test to actually determine the answer. But here, let's just leave it as a tip and trust that the person can make that judgment themselves. All right, I'm going to go and say that if you're an employee of CLI, that you can use this tool. So we're going to go take you to the beginning of the tool. The green dot is the yes button, will take you to the beginning of the tool. But if you're not an employee of CLI, then let's say we'll take you straight to the end. Okay, so we're going to take the red dot and take you straight to the end there. And I'll just zoom in so everyone can see. That's taking us to the end. Brilliant. Okay, so now let's say we want to also see the new page that I've introduced. So I'm going to go and reconnect this start screen to the page that I've just introduced. You guys, I'm just going to go and reconnect that. And just like that, I have incorporated it into the actual workflow. I'm going to hit preview for everyone here, and we get to see how the build is actually coming along. So as you build, you get to already preview how your software looks like. So here we have the start screen. It's all filler content. And in fact, all of this can be white labeled. So it doesn't have to say Checkbox. It doesn't have to have our logo and our colors. It can be tailored completely for the user, the law firm, or perhaps the in-house counsel team that's using this. So if we go and hit start, you'll see that it's pulled in the question I've introduced. So employee test, are you an employee of CLI? And there's the definition I've quite eloquently provided. And if I go and say, I can put in comments, no, I'm Evan from Checkbox. And I click no. If you remember, I've put the no button to take me to the end. And so has it done that? Yes, it has. So not only are you building content very, very quickly, but you're also building in the decision tree and the logic very, very quickly as well. You can see here that the end of the process tracks what we call the transcript. It tracks all the questions you've been asked, responses, and comments as well. And of course, any sort of workflow actions that you've taken in approving, rejecting, or passing on to other users. But we haven't done that just yet, so there's nothing here for that. But you can see there's a record keeping here, which is very, very important if you're pushing this work down to junior staff, or perhaps if it is self-served by the business, that you still have that visibility, or perhaps clients. If you send this to clients to fill out, you have that visibility as to how the clients got to where they did. If I go back for a second and click yes, it will take me to the start of the tool, which in this case is a basic form. Let's go fill in my information, Evan Wong. And you can see here that you can also build in integrations into Checkbox. I'm going to go and put in the ABN, the registered business number for Checkbox. And you'll notice that this field here will then auto-populate, because what it's doing is it's making a live API call to the Australian Business Register. There it is. It took a bit longer than usual. Might be because of the webinar, but it's actually pulled in the registered legal entity name against the government register. And this is very, very important because it means that we never get it wrong, which is actually quite common in practice. We always get it wrong. But also it obviously validates that this is in fact the correct registered entity name. Now, all of the details I'm putting in here manually can also be pulled in automatically, of course, via integrations from, say, a CRM, a customer relationship management system, a practice management system, a client portal, an Active Directory, whatever it may be. You can pull in that data automatically. All right, so here I can just say the breach was sent an email to the wrong client. Actually, in Australia recently, we had a situation where I think an organization accidentally sent an email in CC as opposed to BCC and was fined in 6 figures for that, for a data breach. So let's say we sent an email to the wrong client. So you can see here it says, does Checkbox Pty Ltd hold personal information? What it's done is it's actually pulled in this field here from that third-party system from the previous question, right? So if you remember, it pulled in this particular entity name, and Checkbox is able to reuse that entity name in future questions as well. And that for here is just making it more clear, more personalized. But actually, you can also apply logic and decisions based upon these factors here as well. So for example, let's say checkbox for some reason is special. Maybe it's under some sort of exemption. So as soon as the system knows that it's checkbox, it will actually go and tailor the rest of the decision tree and the questions and the outputs for checkbox specifically. Great. I'm showing you here, there's other kind of tips that are a bit more thought out than the one that I had previously. You can also build in links. As you can see, you can actually link out to your own knowledge base, intranet portal, or in this case, it's to a government website for further guidance. All right, let's keep moving on. I'm going to jump through some of these questions here, which are quite domain specific. I want to actually show you more functionality here than, giving you a webinar on privacy breaches. So here we have a different set of questions where it's asking you what kind of personal information was involved in the breach. And what's happening in the background here is there is a scorecard. There is a weighted scoring system that you can build in Checkbox without code to go and actually allocate these factors different scores. So of course, you can appreciate that if you lose someone's basic information that can't be linked to an individual, that's not too bad. It's not too bad. So this might be given a very low score at the moment. As opposed to if you lost someone's, say, financial details, now that's pretty bad. So that's going to have a higher score. But what if you lost it in combination with their identification information as well? Then of course, these culmination of factors is going to end up with quite a bad risk rating. That is also coupled with other questions as well. So it's not a single page assessment, it actually rolls through. For example, if the information was encrypted, then you would imagine that that would be a better situation than if it wasn't protected at all. But actually what's interesting here is if the information was encrypted, the system built on Checkbox also asks further, was the encryption method industry recognized? So it has the ability to actually dive deeper into an area after it's learned more facts about your situation, your matter, or your transaction. It's able to dive deep and get every single information that you need. And this is really good because often we find that a lot of processes that experts have to go through is this back and forth email process or call in trying to get all the relevant pieces of information to do the analysis piece. So being able to have the system gather all the relevant information and organize it for you is a big win. But let's go back for a second and say that the information was not protected at all. Then what the decision tree does is it skips that question. No longer do we have to ask about whether the encryption type was industry recognized because it obviously doesn't have encryption. So we move on and we get to go and ask other questions as well. So you're always going through the most lean path in Checkbox and not bothered by questions that aren't actually relevant to you. So here, let's say that the number of days that have passed were 50 days have passed, and we've taken some steps to remediate the harm. Let's say we apologize to the client, but of course, apologies are not sufficient enough to alleviate the harm. Great. So the system here is now giving you an automated result. It's actually telling you that given your facts that you've provided, most likely you will have to provide a notification. And so what it now asks is you can actually go and submit in Checkbox additional evidence or information as well. So maybe we can go and upload the Checkbox logo here as an example. You can upload many documents here, but the point is that you're centralizing everything you need on this one matter type or this one matter or one transaction again. Just for fun, for those of you who actually understand this domain, you know that this is totally unnecessary, but I'm doing it anyway. I'm going to go and assess the financial risk of this particular breach, just to show you another functionality of Checkbox. So in Checkbox, you can actually build these tables that are dynamic. So if you remember from the previous process, I actually selected that basic information was lost, financial and identification information. So these three factors are actually now dynamically creating an additional row in this table here. And what it allows me to do is essentially assign different records, and it's doing a live calculation here to calculate financial risk of this loss. So it's doing these live calculations. You can imagine that this is quite helpful for areas like taxation law, even quoting for for an engagement, being able to actually calculate the pricing of a proposal, or if it's operational, of course. And what else is in this table? What you can actually do is tackle use cases like wills and estates to actually go and collect all of the, for example, assets of a particular, um, deceased, as well as the beneficiaries that would be considered, and use these table elements to actually use the rules to allocate the different assets across the different beneficiaries as well. So you can do allocation activities on Checkbox automatically. You can also build in logic, you can see here, to augment the data live from the user interface. So I can go in this case, and nullify the particular row and its impact on the financial loss. But you can really do anything here. You can apply GST or VAT depending on from where in the world you're from. So you can do those calculations. So you're back at the end now at the transcript. Everything's filled in. You can always go back and amend answers if you're not happy with them. But at the end of the process, you can now go and submit this for approval. You can actually go and submit this to say, and build in the rules to say, if the risk is above a certain level, so let's say it's a high level of risk, then please send this off to the chief privacy officer, the legal officer, the legal team to sign off on the process. Or maybe if it's a medium level of risk, then it simply needs to go through the risk team. And if it's a low level of risk, then let's not bother anyone. Let's just store it in the platform, right? So you can actually execute all of those approvals on the platform itself, and it's all tracked, and you can put comments along the way. Now, today it's just me. I don't have anyone else to play with to actually do the approval process. So I'm just going to submit and go right through to the end. And it's going to actually, in this case, generate for me, using the document automation technology we have, two things: one letter and one report. Again, all of this can be customized, right? So, a letter doesn't really make sense if you're using this in a corporate counsel context. But here we have a letter that's generated. It says, "Dear Checkbox, thank you for using this tool. Signed off by me with my signature baked in." But you can also, of course, send this off to DocuSign or Adobe Sign to do the e-signature and workflow that way. In a second document, you can see that there is a report that's generated. So I'll just zoom in a little bit there. You can see that it's the report here is telling me that it is a medium level of risk, not high, not low, but medium, given my facts. And all of these paragraphs or clauses are dynamically generated. They are conditionally generated depending on my situation. And you can see here it says that more than 30 days have elapsed, because if you remember, I put in 50 days. And even the recommended actions are completely tailored to my situation. So it's actually given me recommended actions and the actual details to go and submit to the commissioner. And also estimated table as well is all included there. So you can go and download that as a Word document, a PDF, or even build it so that it automatically fires off an email to go and attach these documents and send it off to the right parties at the end of the process. And so after all of this, you can actually go and track all of the interactions or the matters through Checkbox on a dashboard. So these dashboards are actually completely customized depending on the application that you've built, and you can customize these yourself without code. You can, for example, define that for data breaches, we care about why the breach occurred. So we sent an email to the wrong client, seems to make up 20%. 7% was that someone lost their company phone. The risk levels across different dates as well can be tracked. And also these table or list views that actually allow you to track what is in progress, to change the person working on it, to send a manual reminder via email, to actually switch it to be sensitive or confidential, which changes the permissions and who can access it, as well as the ones that have been completed. You can, of course, access the documents or the transcript that have been created fully equipped with search functionality, so that if I were looking for things that I've worked on, then my name, then only these matters would come up. And you can also go and schedule tasks as well. As an example, you can see here, you can actually go and set the trigger based upon time-based actions or event-based actions, start date, end dates, add the condition for when these scheduled tasks would be triggered. You can actually pick things like, if, say, the data breach contains the word email, then fire this email off. This email being the email that you build custom here, and you can actually go and use some of the tailored and specific information captured in the tool in the email itself as well. So it's very personalized. You can attach things in the email, but go and send this email if all these conditions are set, or alternatively, go and send data. And for those of you who are a bit more technical, we use a webhook, but essentially what it means is that you can actually go and integrate and send whatever data you've collected or calculated in Checkbox to third-party systems to update the data in a practice management system, a customer relationship management system, anything really, even like Office 365, things like that. You can actually go and update and send data and documents through. So we can pull data in, if you remember. We can pull data in to inform the forms and the calculations. We can also push data out as well. We also have the ability to import and export data. So, the process that I just walked you through, you might be thinking, well, for my use case, it's a bit manual. I already have all the information. I just want to run through an assessment and perhaps triage things. Well, you can actually, in Checkbox, upload a CSV file, so a spreadsheet file that actually allows you to run through the process that I've just done, maybe 500 times in 2 minutes. It actually runs through and it generates in bulk, perhaps 500 unique contracts, as an example. Generates 500 unique contracts, but then go to 500 unique recipients to do the e-signature and return. So we've actually done that use case for a company recently, that particular use case. You can, of course, export all the data as well, again, in a CSV format. Brilliant. So let me show a bit of the back end as to the magic as to the tool that you just saw and how it all worked. And then I'll talk about some use cases and then answer some questions, hopefully leaving enough time for that. So you've seen the yes, no fields and how I've introduced that pretty simply. But what about some of the more complex stuff, Evan? How do you do that? Well, let's go and have a look. So for example, a form field here, which you just drag in if you want, but I've got one here pre-built. You can actually go and open the form builder. And within the form builder, you can see that you can actually introduce different types of form field types. So say, for example, I wanted to now capture, let's say the person's age as an example. So I can actually go and introduce a number input. I can go and say, what is your age? And I can also change the formatting of the number itself. So I can actually say, well, I can add a percentage sign. I can reduce the number of decimal points or increase them. But given that it's age, I don't need the percentage sign. I can also do commas as well. And perhaps I can add a prefix as well. So maybe this is Australian dollars, right? But again, for age, we don't need any of these things. So perhaps we'll just keep it vanilla. Great. You can also add conditions as well. So only show this fields if, and you basically just type the condition in here. And what's interesting is we have something called a variable, the concept of a variable. Now, a variable is essentially any sort of field that you don't know the outcome of until it's filled. So age is a very good example of a variable because you know that they're going to put in their age here, but you don't know what their age will be. Now, what we use in Checkbox is this variable system is to actually go and inform the rules, the decisions, the documents, the outputs, and even the text that displays using this variable concept. It's actually quite simple. So, for example, a variable is organization. So you can see here it says, does organization hold personal information? Now, a previous page actually captured this variable called organization, and I can refer to it quite easily by simply typing in O. What it does is it then suggests all of the variables that start with O, and it actually allows you to auto-populate the rest of that variable. So you're never getting it wrong, and you never have to memorize everything. And you can go and rename these variables as well. So when I created this age variable, of course, the system doesn't know that this is about age, right? And so it's just automatically created this kind of index called num535. It's a number, and it's the 535th variable I've created in this system. So I can actually go and refer to this variable as num535 from here on out. But if I wanted to give it a semantic meaning, I can go and rename this as age. So now I can keep referring to this field as age in the same way that I've renamed the previous field as organization. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an insider knowledge as to how tools like the one you saw were built through this kind of very, very simple, intuitive kind of variable system as well as forms. But to show you something else as well, so the risk weighting as well, I promised you that it would be done very easily with our code. So this is the interface that you build the risk weighting in. You can see here that financial details was given a score of 3, but contact information was 2, and basic information was simply 1. All of this is obviously subjective, and I can go and change this. For example, financial details I may consider now to be a score of 5, and I can just change it just like that. We have the proper publishing and versioning systems, of course, to go and deploy these changes out to the users. So it's not like I'm fiddling around here and people in the outside world are panicking because things are changing. But yeah, so that's how you build the risk scoring or the weighting, and then that feeds into elements like the table, as an example. I'll show you here. The table here is using very basic kind of Excel functionality, right? Where you can actually go and sum up things by using a sum formula or use nested if conditions as well. And so often people will ask, what is the extent of the logic you can accommodate in Checkbox? The answer is, well, we can do all basic arithmetic. So add, subtract, multiplication, division, as well as nested if functions, sum functions, as well as through the functions, literally functions here in Checkbox, you can emulate index matches and VLOOKUPs as well. So in combination with all of that, of course, and ands and ors, you can actually, basically accommodate almost every single type of typical business logic rule. And finally, the last thing I'll show you before I turn over to the use cases to share a bit more is the document automation interface. So you can see here in Checkbox, you can automate the documents in what is very similar to a Google Docs interface, where you have a web-based version of applying content and rules. So if I click into the more interesting tab here, I have here the document that was around the risk report. So you can see here, there's the high level of risk outcome, there's a medium level of risk outcome. And the key thing here is that when we went through the process, only one of these outcomes was materialized because we actually apply conditions as well to these set of texts. You can also do this in line, of course. But here I'm saying that if the risk score is greater than 25, then it's considered a high level of risk. You can do nested rules, you can do if functions again. And of course, you can do, for those of you who are familiar with the concept of mail merge, of course, very similar, you can input dynamic text as well. So not only are the paragraphs dynamic, but the content within them can also be dynamic as well. Now, again, being in the legal industry, we all know documents are very, very important to us, including the formatting of them. So if, for example, you needed very rich styling for the documents, then we also offer the option of uploading an actual native Word, Microsoft Word document as well. And so you can build your whole document or your template in there, simply upload it, and you will be able to get the full kind of rich styling that comes with Microsoft Word. Brilliant. I've already talked about DocuSign, so I won't go through that, but it's all native here and you configure it all here. You build your emails as well automatically out of the system right here as well. You can see that you can build custom email fields as well. And you can put conditions to understand when the emails would fire off. And I feel like now I am absolutely overwhelming you with features, and there is definitely a lot more to show. But to avoid getting way too deep into this, let me just end the actual live demo there and jump into the final slide that I'll share with you before I spend about 10 minutes on Q&A if there are any. So here we have basically some of the use cases that have gone through Checkbox. So you've seen today one example, but you have to remember that Checkbox is a platform. We are a platform, which means that you can actually build and solve whatever problems you see fit. So I've broken it down into 2 streams here. We have law firms at the top, corporate legal on the bottom, and we have 3 different buckets that I put them into, either operational use cases, enablement, which means that you're trying to really empower your existing subject matter experts to do a better, or your business to do the job better. And then finally, I guess, productization, taking what is typically a service and making it available as a product. So starting from the top left, operational for law firms, you can see that we've done processes that are compliance related, things like onboarding for law firms. So in certain parts of the world, that is, Singapore or New Zealand, there's something known as phase two KYC. Now, know your customer or anti-money laundering AML is typically in Australia seen in financial institutions, banks, insurance companies, wealth advisors, but it's actually being rolled out now across real estate agents and lawyers as well. And so being able to automate and ensure that you're compliant through that process is one of the use cases we've seen for Checkbox. The other thing is engagement letters. I know everyone loves engagement letters and doing them because it's such a fun use of time. But essentially, a lot of people are now using Checkbox to also automate that engagement letter process. Through the onboarding process of a customer, can we actually go and pre-create that engagement letter, do the signature as well as calculate the fees involved in that engagement if those fees are based upon pretty standard factors. On the flip side, for corporate legal, in the operational space, that is trying to get better efficiency, we've seen it very heavily used in procurement. So procurement is this beautiful area where it's currently done very manually. It has a lot of approval processes required and documents along the way, and it often does involve legal as part of the process alongside other teams like IT, risk, marketing potentially as well. So companies are using Checkbox to go and actually help the business identify the correct procurement channel or the stream, whether it's self-serve, whether it's a high-touch process, a medium-touch process. Often you'll have a unique name that you give to each of these channels in an organization. And it helps you go through the right channel, collect the right information. So if the contract value is over, say, $100,000, then it must get this level of approval. If the contract is regarding this type of good and service, it must go to this team. And it sets up the whole kind of parallel approval process as well to send off to those relevant teams for that parallel approval. And then it updates information at the back of it. You can also build in controls as well, probably useful to mention. For example, if you're procuring a piece of technology, have you considered at least 3 different vendors? Have you actually put it out to tender? So if you go through the system and you don't have at least 3 vendors going through it, the system actually pushes back and says, well, you're failing this control. Please come back when you've met that requirement. So it's ensuring this compliant by design experience. The other one is matter intake and triage. So again, as a corporate legal team, you have a ridiculous amount of incoming requests from the business to actually work out, do I need it? Can I get an NDA for this? Can I get a trial agreement for this? Can you review this contract? Can this person sign this off? Who needs to sign this off? So how do you actually organize all of this intake so that it can feed nicely, for example, into a matter management system? So at the moment we're working to integrate with some of those matter management systems. So you create that very nice kind of end-to-end user journey of using Checkbox to do the decision tree triage and then feeds into a matter management system. Back onto the law firm side, for enablement, you see a lot of pieces used for regulatory compliance. So for example, if you're, let's say you're a company that deals with food, right? Like you're actually, let's say you're retail, you're a FMCG retail food supermarket. Then you would have to comply with very specific industry regulations like food labeling, as an example. So how do you, as a law firm, build tools for your clients that actually allow you to provide that audit, that control process at a technology level that might sit alongside your legal services? So being able to provide that audit, but also generate a gap recommendation report. We've talked about privacy already, so let's move on. On the corporate legal side, enablement is automating your whole NDA generation, but also the workflow behind it. So that is who needs to sign, how do you sign it, the tracking on dashboards as to where it's up to, as well as claims assessment. This is a very interesting one. So claims is not typically what we consider law, but often falls within the ambit of legal teams. So whether that's you're an insurance company literally doing claims, or you're a big telecommunication company doing customer claims, or even oil and gas doing claims, or again, retail doing claims, right? Every organization will have customer claims against them. How do you actually go in and work out the eligibility of that claim in a very efficient way? Have a calculation engine that works out the amount to actually pay out under the claim and generate the compensation package and lettering to go and to actually communicate and notify for that claim. So all of that can be done again in Checkbox through the interface, the drag and drop you saw. The final column is productization. So this is around being quite bold as law firms to go and take what is typically a service and provide it either as a lead generation on your website or perhaps even as a software as a service revenue stream on your website as well. So we've seen this for wills and estate, of course, quite procedural, being able to codify the whole process into a piece of software and then provide it for end customers. And also marketing review as well. How do you create a marketing review tool that walks a user through kind of the considerations for their particular policies and the approval processes for that marketing review as well. On the flip side, corporate legal productization is around things like disclaimers. How do you completely decouple the legal team from a disclaimer generation process and allow the marketing team or the account management team to go and generate it themselves, but still have the visibility and control to feel comfortable about that self-service? And finally, the standard advice. So again, the question of how do I actually protect the IP that I've generated in my work, in this project, or perhaps again, who needs to sign this given XYZ factors in our business? So being able to have a system to provide that self-service advice on behalf of the legal team would obviously alleviate a lot of the pressure of time at the moment on them. All right, that's a lot of talking. It's probably the most amount of talking I've done in my life in one go. So let me go and skip over to the Q&A, which I think I've seen one come through there, and see if I can answer this. Rakesh, thank you for the very logistical question, which is, will we get a recording of this session? I've got my times mixed up. I believe this is being recorded. So Terry on the CLI side will be very kind as to share this with everyone. And I think she will make it available as well. So if you've missed the beginning, that is totally fine. You will be able to go back and check it out. Brilliant. Does anyone have any other questions? We have about maybe 5 minutes more for questions before I have enough time for Terry to wrap up as well.
Evan, just a quick one while others are perhaps gathering their thoughts. Yes. It seems like it's a very robust and comprehensive platform. So it's am I right in saying that it really is highly customizable? Is that right?
It is highly customizable. I think it's also very important to appreciate what we don't do, because often, it's really important to understand that, yes, it looks really broad, but we're not trying to be everything to everyone either. If you look at the underlying theme of everything that I've talked about and everything that I've shown you, we are really just a platform to allow experts to automate what is typically a manual workflow or a manual execution of expert knowledge, right? Again, if I refer back to that previous slide that I went through, we want the experts to primarily focus within that kind of red, pink box, right? And so we want to take care of the rest. And so we don't do, if you were thinking about very customized software, let's say if you were thinking, hey, can we use this to build an AI contract review tool? The answer is no. Checkbox can't build those technologies for you. Or perhaps if you're thinking, can we use this to build our own, a client portal and create a communications interface where we can collaborate with clients on this one internet portal? The answer is no. Again, we don't actually build those types of software. We primarily focus on workflow and automation formed within experiences like the ones here. But that's a good question, Terry. Really, really good.
And thank you for answering it so comprehensively. I mean, I guess that as we kind of look at this, though, you're working very much on both sides of that fence, right? You're working with law firms and working with corporate legal. Are you seeing that there's more of an uptake, generally speaking, and I appreciate it is a generalization, with one of those groups over the other, or are they kind of about the same?
Yeah, that's also a very good question. There is definitely equal amounts of interest from both sides as to how far they go along the journey of really implementing Checkbox. we've actually seen corporate legal really pick up. And we do have a handful of law firm customers as well, some really great progressive ones like Gilbert and Tobin, Holland Wilcox, Clayton Utz are all customers of ours on the law firm side. And really, we started our business there. But what's interesting is that there's been this massive boom, I guess, that people in the ecosystem and industry would very much be aware of the term legal operations or legal ops, and the educational work that's done by Clock that came out of the US, and very much now present in Australia. And this kind of whole concept of how do I, as a legal function, achieve those three drivers that I talked about at the beginning? How do I do that? And Checkbox fits really, really nicely into a lot of that. So we work with a lot of big brands now in Australia who are actually transforming the way that they're delivering legal services back to the business. So they have faster turnaround times, they have more time to actually do work that matters, and there's a greater visibility as well and greater compliance. So I guess the short answer to your question is both. Both are interested, but we're starting to see now a lot more uptake in corporate legal, which in itself is interesting for law firms because they are your customers. So you definitely want to be aware of what they're doing on their side when it comes to legal technology and innovation, and seeing if you can provide value for that as well, even if it's not your core kind of legal services business.
And I guess the follow-on question from that, Evan, is that if you're not using the sorts of amazing products that you've demonstrated today, then there's going to be a real issue with being able to deliver efficiently and even effectively in the not too far distant future, which has got to influence choice, right, in terms of your potential or prospective clients.
Oh, 100%. Right. So the legal landscape is changing very rapidly, and corporate legal teams are actually getting a lot more tech savvy, a lot more proactive about how they actually consume legal services. And you can see the trends globally, Australia, but also globally, and also in other markets, that there is now this kind of like this culture of insourcing legal services, where corporate legal is trying to bring work back in away from external counsel. And so, this dynamic, how do you as a law firm really react to this change, and how do you stay relevant if you start to lose touch with how your clients are actually going through these legal processes internally, but also how they serve their clients, which is the business, right? All the different business units are the corporate legal's clients. So how are they doing it? It's so important to stay on top of that. So you're exactly right.
Well, Evan, thank you so much for the presentation today. Really is an amazing product, and congratulations on developing it. We're delighted to have had you kick off this series, as I said at the beginning, and really enjoyed your presentation. The recording will definitely be available for folks who were unable to make it today, or for some other reason had to leave us. At the Centre for Legal Innovation, we're really focused on supporting people such as you, Evan, and the work that you're doing in Checkbox. We think it's incredibly important. It's shaping and changing the legal industry in a way that we've never seen before, and in a good way, I think, as you said at the beginning, to allow folks to really add their value with dealing with the more complex issues versus those that can be automated or are routinized by their nature anyway. So thank you very much again. Folks, don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook. This is the first of a series, so there will be many more to come. And we can only hope, Evan, that they were and will be as engaging as this one has been today. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you so much. Bye, guys. Thank you.